Welcome everyone. We are in the week 12 of week 16. So it's been several months of us working together. So you all know what am I going to say now. I'm very happy to welcome Lessa as our co-facilitator along with Taj and Sharan. You hear from them on the chat. You would also hear from them in our sharing. As usual, please select an option by editing your name so we can allocate you to right breakout room. We have one breakout room planned today. Write W if you prefer having written breakout room, or S if you like spoken breakout rooms. We also have option for English, French, and Spanish. It depends on how many people are on the call who speak the same language as you. We'll try to put you in the same room. We have an icebreaker. Please tell us about a website or an app that doesn't exist, but you really wish they did. I love some of these ideas and I would love to see them live. With that, I want to just begin by telling you where we are at today. And as you all know, we have been doing that for a while. So you would see yourself moving across this slider. So we are here now, Open Science Garden 3, which is the last module of the 3 parts we do. So today we're very lucky to have some of the favorite and very inspiring people who've joined us today to talk to you about openness to diversity of knowledge, open engagement of social actors. You would also see, sorry, I can't change my, and you would also have a lot more videos that we are not going to share in this cohort, but has come from our previous speakers. So that's my quick intro, just to say, well done. We're here. We have a few more weeks to go. And I see some of you all are also preparing to think about what it looks like after OLS cohort is over. And with that, I'm very delighted to pass it to Stephane, who will be talking today about open hardware. Stephane, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. You should be able to share your screen.
Yes, sure. Um, I hope everyone can see the screen.
It is still sharing, and I'll tell you when yeah, we see this. Also, folks, this is a new thing on Zoom, this grayscale that you're looking at. It's unfortunate that we can't really change that, but
Okay.
we'll see. I think it's the Zoom things panel. So if you, Stephanie, can hide that as much as possible, especially like the people's view, we can see rest of your screen too.
Hide what? Sorry.
If you could hide the people's faces you might be looking,
Okay. This
because
one?
we see that as, yeah, that one.
Okay. Sorry.
Perfect. Now that's perfect. So we see most of your screen, and please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be able to share part of our work and activities. I'm so happy today to be able to speak about open hardware because it's something that has been really useful for us in our daily activities. There are different approaches, and yeah, I'll just share what we have it as perspective. So today I'll just give a brief background on what is open hardware, but focus a bit more on the physical and digital tool for enable innovation in different contexts, in our own context specifically, and also the community perspective of open hardware. So start by the basics. So there are so many information about open hardware, but I think what I like to keep in mind is that it mostly refers to design specification of physical objects which are licensed in such a way that the particular object can be studied, modified, created, and distributed by anyone. So generally, when we talk about open hardware, it grants the users of these tools 4 fundamental freedoms. the freedom to use, obviously, to be able to replicate and use the hardware, the device, or the products. To study it, basically, you need to be able to make some modification and make it suitable for your own personal need, a kind of way of tailor the particular device to suit their own need. And then you should also be able to share any improvement, any modification you make on the particular hardware. So these are the four fundamental freedoms that is granted. So now the difference really that open hardware brings in addition, in contrast to other kind of products, is that the open provides, I think it's even a requirement to be called open hardware. You need to have a quite complete documentation, um, generally including the design file, the source code, because most often open hardware are made up of hardware and software part. So most often you need to be able to have access to that. And also, more importantly, the license government governing the reproduction of the particular device, allowing the modification and distribution. I think during the OLS training, there's a lot of information about a license and everything and how to use that, use appropriate license for specific devices. So, but it's a very important element in open hardware. So open source hardware is all about collaborative innovation. So it's also a very, very important aspect of open hardware. So networking, knowledge sharing, collaboration, co-creation, and decentralization is are very important when talking about coming up with a novel hardware. So it often sets the scene for product development practice and new product development practice that tend to be more participative, onboarding, enabling um, the onboard of many people from different background. Anyone that's interested, that real openness is one of the key practice. Most often, hardware development projects can be characterized by their degree of openness. We have the transparency. Any person can have unrestricted access to the product's information. So we really need to have access. The accessibility. You have the freedom to take part in the development, and also the replicability. So finally, about the basics. So usually open hardware products or projects follow particular design principle. So it's not an exhaustive list. Definitely, depending on the size of the nature of the projects, will have different workflow to follow. But generally, these are some of the design principle most of the project will follow. As much as possible, use only free and open source software toolchain. To be able to develop an open hardware is preferable to use free and open tools that ease the process of replicability and also modification. So attempt to minimize the number and type of parts. So and then the complexity of the design and the hardware. Maximize the use of component that can be widely accessible as well as the tool. In case you are using specific equipment, specific part, you might want to make sure that they can be quite accessible everywhere. And then we come again at the level of the documentation. It's very important to meticulously document the design, the manufacturer. So it includes raw source, the code. So really everything from the design, the elements making the design, and also the user instruction and manufacturing instruction. And then you have to share. An open hardware needs to be shared openly. So, and then it gives information on what constitutes a fair use. Now, coming back to the license, and also really, really share with the community for people to be able to see, use, modify, and adjust, improve. So talking about some examples, I think one of the main examples that is striking to everyone is the case of Arduino, which has been the brain behind most of the design and open hardware projects and device. So I think it's a very great example that we can cite, but I won't take too much time here. But I will take some example that I really think they are really striking personally without publicity. But really, I really like I would like to talk about two projects. The Prusa, which is mostly dealing with 3D printing technology, the device. I really like they to cite this example because I think everything started with an open source project, and at the end of the day, they managed to become one of the leading venture as far as 3D modeling. And I really, just to emphasize why I pick up this, you can find this on the website. We wouldn't exist without open source. Everything we do, everything we sell is open source. All source code, printed part, blueprint secret is freely available to anyone on GitHub. I think this summarizes really well what an open hardware is. I mean, at different level, be it a groundbreaking project or even a full-fledged startup or company. This should be what we can expect on open hardware. Another example that I relate to concerning open hardware is the Open Flexure project. So the projects aim to make high precision mechanical positioning available to everyone with 3D printers for use in microscopes, micro manipulator, and more. So the projects like came about the design of this particular Microsoft that we can see using 3D printed technology, automated electronics, robotics, and also a lot of AI because in addition to the hardware, the device itself, there's a lot of work that's done on the software because to be able to operate the microscope, you need a particular software, and now use a lot of AI algorithm to be able to kind of do a particular task. I think what I have in mind is the application of this device on the malaria detection in Tanzania. So the microscope was trained to be able to recognize the parasite shape and then count and everything. So it was really interesting. And another aspect is that the project was developed not to replace like technicians that were doing the diagnostics, but actually to ease the process. So, and it's also bring to light the idea of using AI not for replacing humans or everything, but as a tool to help the manipulator and operator. So we can have pictures of slides that were taken using the device. So it's really good in terms of resolution. And then another aspect of open hardware generally revolves around a very strong community. We mentioned that most of the projects carry the feature to be able to use, edit, modify, and improve. So generally, we have various shapes around that. For the open Flexure projects, we have a very dynamic community that mostly interacts under the Open Flexure forum. But we also have some gathering. I was privileged to attend the Open Flexure conference in the UK in 2022. That was gathering basically the whole community, those who could make it around the project. So it's really great to see that happening. So now I'll jump in after this example of open hardware about some of the hardware we've been able to develop as part of the Mboa Lab. And then our focus was mostly on the tools, be it physical or digital, that were enabling research and innovation, which is in line with our mission and vision. So we started designing and prototyping some of the equipment to suit our own need. That's how we came about open hardware and started to implement it to really solve our own problems. And then we worked on many projects, but I think I would like to cite two here, which is the open source incubator for microbiology. So the project was developed under the BFOSH like projects that was supported by Mozilla Foundation. So it enabled the creation of this particular device, which is basically an incubator that enables to speed up the process of fermentation or growth of bacteria. And then the application is also can be extended to things like yogurt production, and also even for egg hatching. So you can still use the device, and some people have been using the particular design for that. So as it's an open hardware project, so all the parts coming back to all the design specification, all the parts, the bill of material, everything you need to be able to replicate, have access, edit, improve the projects can be available on GitHub. The second project we've worked on is actually the Shaker incubator. It's basically an incubator, but it has the option of having a shaking a pan, and it's very useful for microbiology as well, because part of the work we do in Boalab is also related to protein production and microbiology. So it was very useful for us to develop that particular equipment and also use it for our own for other activities. So once again, it's available on GitHub. So most of the platform we use are GitHub and GitLab. Um, so talking about some other projects. So we have this particular project that's framed under the Health for Health projects. So it's basically a project that was launched to bring integration of AI and hardware to ease the process, overcome the barrier of accessibility and accuracy of diagnostic tool. So we really want to focus on of diagnostics application. And then I would like to cite the Mbwatoscope, which is the open source virological stethoscope that we've been able to work on. So basically, the idea is to have an hardware to be able to record sounds, and then you have an artificial intelligence algorithm that has to analyze the sound to have to give a diagnostics. So that's just some design specification, but we can have how the software works. So you just record the sound using the digital stethoscope, and then you can have a diagnostic. And also the idea is to be able to send the information to a practitioner. So so this is another project we've been able to work under the AI for Health project. And then I cannot pass this without citing some of the projects we've been able to implement through open life science projects, because as also participant of the open life science, we've been able to really get the tool and have the knowledge and skill to be able to run some of the projects. So we have the improved diagnostic of cancer through artificial intelligence digital pathology. That was one of the first projects we went, and the projects OLS really helped us to frame and also manage that in a very efficient manner. And then from invisible to citizen, apparent age for primary school children without birth certificate. So in these projects, we were looking at really combining AI algorithm and also a device that will be able to give the age of people like in a more standard manner, because up to now not their inability to determine the right age prevents a lot of people to have birth certificates in our setting. So we were thinking of developing a solution that would be able to bring about kind of reliably confirming the age. Mostly we are targeting children because they are the most affected. So really, really, I'm also happy to mention these projects. And then the AI for Health projects was kind of recognized by UNESCO amongst the top 100 early stage projects. So it's also important to cite. So to conclude about open hardware, I would like to really, really emphasize on the social dimension of open hardware. So in addition to really enabling us to more reliably, accurately, and in a more tailored manner perform tasks and activity. I think there's also a community dimension that needs to be highlighted. And generally, in open source hardware projects, communities serve as a powerful catalyst for innovation, fostering the development of new idea, hardware design, and sustainable practices, and also thriving ecosystem. And I just want to take this particular example. I don't know if you remember here. I had this picture. So here we see Fabrice. He was one of the member of the Boa Lab, and also someone we worked with since 2019. So the picture that you saw here actually is since 2019. So where we were really working on developing open source hardware and everything. And then we moved from this to this through I think that's thanks to open science hardware. And then how did that happen? So Fabrice, after passing Anboa Lab, he created his own startup, Africa Robots, now focusing on locally manufacturing machines and robotic solutions. We focus on laser cutting and engraving machines. So we can see here his invention. Basically, it's a CO2 and plasma laser cutting and engraving machines. So that's both at the same time a laser cutter and also a CO2 cutter that enable to cut steel. So I think thanks to this machine, it can perform really, really great. Ah, sorry, I removed the sound. So the video was showing, don't know if I can mute. Okay, how the machine works. Sorry. Okay, so I mean, in terms of resolution and capacity, the machine really, really works as commercial laser cutter. So thanks to that, he has been able to um, grow his startup, and now is representing the country all over the world, and also improving his own startup, also working on new projects. So I think it's a great example that I wanted to show to talk about open science in practice. That is not only about enabling people to really perform the tasks they need in a more personal manner, but it also has the potential to grow and create enabling environment for people. So I would like to stop here. I hope I did not cross the allocated time. Thank you
That
very much.
was fantastic, Stephane. I mean, if you had taken more time, I would continue listening anyway. Thank
Oh,
you so
sorry.
much for coming and sharing that. We still have actually time for some questions. I haven't been keeping eye on chat because I was taking notes, so I'm going to check with Taj. Was there any question that we might have missed, Taj?
No. Only a comment from Faisal about possibly inviting Stephanie to Data Science Initiative Africa Consortium for a presentation that might inspire younger generations to take up open
Maybe we
hardware
just have
research.
people. That sounds great. And I will, Stephane is on Slack and they will share email. Definitely, we'll be happy to put you in touch, Faisal, directly. If people have questions, they can actually raise their hand. Vincent, yes, the slides will be shared.
Yes.
We will be asking for that and put on Zenodo. If there is any question, you can raise your hand. We still have a few minutes. We're doing well. We have a question from Laura. How can we make open hardware accessible to people as there might be economical barrier to get all the materials. I want to begin answering and pass it to Stephane. Actually, one of the reasons why open hardware movement started was exactly the economic barrier. And Stephane's examples definitely highlight that. But I'm going to pass it to you, Stephane. Tell us how Moboa Lab has been doing exactly that, combating.
Yes, I think in our own case, yeah, definitely we were limited by the same challenges everyone faced in resource limited settings. The lack of a kind of source approvisionment source for the parts, because to be able to design and prototype hardware, you need some parts that you are going to assemble. So definitely we had real issues on getting these parts. For example, if you want to order something in Africa, we don't have Amazon or something, so really it takes months to take any parts you need. So that's one of the limitation. If we need to speed up open hardware development and having more people going for that, we really need to think about the logistics on making available the parts we need to really create new hardware, new device, and everything. The economic barrier is there, but I think by thinking about the simplification of the design, you can also overcome some of that. Because, for example, we really took that into account when we were developing the microbiology incubator. We made sure that all the parts are locally available, and it was also reducing the cost, the final cost of the equipment. So definitely there are some ways around. And as I mentioned, once you have a product, a prototype to show off, generally you can think about some strategy to be able to get support and grow and maybe move to the prototypes to a kind of a more complete equipment. Because for example, Fabrice, the example I mentioned, once he was able to show that he has something that works, he was also able to present that to accelerator program competition in Cameroon, and he started getting support from the government, for example. So these are some strategy you can use to overcome the economic barriers. But like the main problem I would say are the availability, the lack of access to the parts, and also collaboration helps with kind of like solving the technical challenges. I'll stop here for. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And we will drop some links from Gosh where some of the
Yes.
communities can help also answer many questions after this. Thank you so much again, Stefane. And congratulations for your new PhD in Italy. We're very excited for you.
Thank you
With
very
that,
much.
um, please do give a round of applause or emojis you would like. And I'm very happy to pass it to another favorite person of ours, Laura Carter, for the next
Thanks,
talk.
Malvika. And thank you, Stephane, for a really excellent talk. I found that super interesting. I learned a lot. Hi, everybody. I am going to try to share my slides. I feel like every time I do this, Zoom has updated something and it looks different. But let's try that. Aha, okay. Can you see, have you got all the little dark overlays, or can you see okay?
This seems super clear. Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Wonderful. So hi, everybody. My name's Laura Carter, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about participatory research and about bringing lots of different people into your projects. So who am I? Why am I talking about this? So I'm Laura. I live in Seattle, which is on traditional Duwamish lands in the Pacific Northwest of the US. But as you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm originally from the UK. I'm from London. And I apologize if you've got any background noise. I've got these pet birds that are very annoyed that I haven't let them out yet this morning, and you may be able to hear them shouting. So I apologize for that. I'm currently a tech policy fellow at the University of California in Berkeley. I finished my PhD last year. I did it in data technology and human rights at the University of Essex, which is in the UK. I've worked as a senior researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute, which is a research institute in the UK and Europe looking at making data and AI work for people and society. I've also been a researcher and a policy advisor at Amnesty International. And I've been part of OLS since 2020. I've been a mentor since 2021. So I'm very excited to be back here. And the sort of the through line, I guess, of my work has always been that the work that I do, the research that I do, the projects that I run they're all about people. They're about taking people seriously, taking their experiences seriously, and trying to use those experiences, learn about people's lives, to try to build a better world for everybody. So today I'm going to be talking about participatory research, and I found this nice graphic, which I'll talk about. On the right-hand side, you've got open source development, which links to what Stephane was talking about earlier. It's about making things, in this case, source code, but it can also include hardware and other things available for other people to use, reuse, remix, do things with. So it is about people working together, but the connections, they might be working individually or in small groups. They're not necessarily all part of one project. Moving over slightly to the left, you might well have come across the idea of citizen science. And so this is a broad term, but it usually covers quote unquote scientific research, and that's a broad definition, which is conducted with the involvement of people who aren't professional researchers. Sometimes this is also called crowdsourced science or crowdsourced researchers. It's where the research questions are set by professional researchers, PIs, for example. But the actual research is often done by people who aren't connected or paid by the institution. So an example of that here in the US, it's called the backyard bird count. Ornithologists want to know what kind of birds are where, but the data about which birds you can see in your backyard is collected by interested members of the public. And the idea here is you've got bird watchers who are already doing this. They're looking at birds and writing down who's where. But it's also a good way to get young people, kids, interested members of the public involved in science. They collect the data, they send it to, in this case, Cornell, which collates it. So that's citizen science. And the idea of participatory research is that it goes further. Ideally, it brings in people who aren't professional researchers or scientists right from the start, including developing the research questions. So deciding what the project is going to do and what questions it's going to investigate. So this particular image comes from a project that's run in the UK called Ort Spaces. And the idea of Ort Spaces is that it's aiming to make lots of different kinds of public and private spaces, so train stations, libraries, cafes, houses. It's trying to make them better for autistic people by talking to people about their different sensory processing experiences and what kind of experiences they have so that they can inform how to make things better. So a good question for you all to think about is, if you want to do a participatory project, who are your participants? Are they other researchers that you might be working with? Are you doing a citizen scientist project? Are you trying to bring in non-professional researchers to collect data and contribute it to you? Are you working with community groups? So for Ort Spaces, that might be community groups, social groups for people with autism. Or are you trying to reach people who are directly affected by the problem that you're trying to address? So for example, in Stephane's talk, if you're trying to build open hardware to help determine the ages of children without birth certificates, then maybe some of your participants are going to be those children and their families who are directly affected by the problem of not having a birth certificate and how that impacts them. And to talk about the examples, like here are some pieces of research that I've worked on or that I've worked with colleagues who've done. So in some of the areas of work, my participants are the co-authors. I do a lot of theoretical and critical work, so not necessarily going out and talking to people, but thinking about problems and reading about problems and trying to come up with frameworks. So I was hoping to be able to link to a paper here, but unfortunately, that I did with these 6 other co-authors, but unfortunately it just got rejected. So I put the list of co-authors there. You might be working with peer researchers or citizen researchers. So I've got a link here to a piece of work that my colleagues at the Ada Lovelace Institute worked on, which was looking at socioeconomic inequalities in digital health systems. And the way we did this research was interview based. So it was talking to people who had experienced these inequalities, but we trained peer researchers, so people from the communities that we were working with. We trained them to carry out interviews and collect data and analyze data, so that they had more control over what data was being collected, how it was being collected, and what they wanted to record when they were doing the interviews. Your participants might be research subjects in the traditional sense. So in the middle here, I've got a report that I wrote while I was at Amnesty, which was about the care of children with variations of sex characteristics, so intersex children who have different chromosomes or different hormonal balances. So this was another piece of more traditional interview-based research, where I and my colleagues went out and interviewed people about their experiences. But when we were planning how we were going to publish this research and build campaigns around it, we also brought a lot of our interviewees back and put them in a room and help, and they were able to contribute to planning the campaign that we were building out of this research. And then on the right there, I've got a report from another ADA project, which was the Citizens Biometrics Council. So for this, we ran what's called a citizens assembly, citizen in the sense of person who is affected rather than, in this case, legal citizen of a particular country. But it's a specific form of public participation which aims to bring in diverse views from different members of the public. And we brought together 50 people from different parts of the UK and different backgrounds, different experiences, to help make recommendations on how biometrics should be used. So biometrics can be quite a technical topic. And so this involved a lot of first recruiting people to participate, but also making sure they had the information in the background to be able to contribute effectively. So this was a long-term project. We had about 50 people, and I think it ran over 8 months, meeting regularly to learn about different ways that biometrics are being used, and gather their opinions about what they thought about the use of biometrics in the UK. And I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the very popular frameworks for participation. Some of you might have seen this diagram before. It's called the Ladder of Participation. It was developed by Sherry Arnstein more than 50 years ago. So I put a reference on the slide there for a reprint from 2019, which might be easier to access because sometimes it's quite hard to find very old academic papers. But the reason why it's stuck around for more than 50 years is because a lot of people find it very useful. Her original article talks about citizen participation because it was actually originally drawn up to talk about city planning. But it's been very applicable to a lot more areas. And the idea of the ladder of participation is the higher up you go on the ladder, the more participation from different people, different members of communities that you have. So at the bottom, you've got non-participation. So your project could be purely an educational project, which sees the people, the communities that you're working with as passive recipients of the information that you're giving them. Or even worse, it could be a manipulative project. And this is where you set it up to look like you're including community members, but actually you don't involve them in anything. And unfortunately, I suspect a lot of us, particularly if you've been in big institutions, you may have experience of being on committees or being part of groups that are told that you are an active participant in a particular decision-making process, but in fact, you have no power at all. In the middle, you've got what's called tokenism. So this might be informing people about the decisions that you're making in a particular project, about, for example, what research questions to ask or where to put funding that you've been given on a particular project. You might be doing consultation, which is where you ask people for their input, but you don't necessarily commit to doing anything with that input. or maybe placation, which is where perhaps you give people from a particularly affected community a few seats at the decision-making table, but you make sure that you retain the balance of power, or that the people in power retain most of the voting power. You make sure that the people that you're inviting in can be outvoted if they need to be. And then at the top, you've got what could be considered more genuine forms of, and Arnstein calls it citizen power, you could call it people power or participant power. You could have partnerships where you involve people in decision making. You might even delegate certain decisions to the people that you're trying to involve. And right at the top, you've got what Arnstein calls citizen control, which is where you, as the researcher or the project manager, you cede control. You say, actually, this is not a project about me, it's a project about the particular community, and therefore that community is going to be the one to make decisions about. So I want you to think a little bit about the people in your project, about your participants, the people that you are trying to help maybe, or the people that you are trying to work with, and think about where they sit on this ladder. And maybe if you're part of a bigger project, think a little bit about where you sit on this particular ladder. For example, again, some of us will have had experiences like this. If you're part of a big project with perhaps a very domineering or very powerful PI, you might find that you're there at the top with all the power and you're maybe near the bottom. There might be limited, you may be limited in what you can do in a particular project. So this ladder of participation is quite useful for thinking about who holds power and where power sits in terms of you, whether you're making decisions about your project or the people that you're working with. If you're trying to help people or you're trying to work with people, where do they sit on this particular ladder? And not everybody involved in the project is going to be at the same place. So the ladder of participation, as I said, was initially developed as for city planning, and there, when Arnstein drew it up, it was very much, there were the planners who had the power, and there were the citizens, the people who were residents of a particular area. But of course, not everybody's going to be in the same place, even amongst a particular community group that you're working with. And as I said before, not everybody is going to be, you may not be at the top, you may not be the person who's making the decisions. But that doesn't mean you have no power at all. And so what I think is a useful exercise for you in the projects that you're running, as you are thinking about opening up your projects and bringing different people into them, is to think about where you sit on the ladder and how you can move other people up, whether it's moving yourself up or whether it's moving other people into more effective positions to make decisions. And the reason why I think this is particularly relevant to open research and open project planning is because it's much, much easier to open up your project and to have people participate if you are clear about how you make decisions and how you are deciding to ask particular research questions or write a particular paper or target a particular audience. The more open you can be about that, the more you are able to have different people participating and give more people more power in, research or projects or work that ultimately affects them and affects their lives. So thank you very much. And yeah, are there any questions if we have time?
Thank you so much, Laura. As always, pleasure to hear from you, and thank you for sharing that. Are there any questions? That's a very good question. I do want to kind of emphasize the part that you were saying about that we may not have the power exactly like others, but we all have power to determine who comes in, who joins, or even like power to vote or power to select our own leaders. I really appreciate you emphasizing that. Again, Taj, are there questions in the chat that I wasn't keeping an eye on? Vincent.
Yes, thank you very much for the great talk. I had a very quick question. This participation or participatory research, it seems that it applies to like a subset of all the research that can happen, right? So could you comment on that? I assume there are some research projects like in mathematics or physics, where it might not be as relevant to have this framework in mind, but other projects like the ones that have impacts on cities and the lives of or citizens and communities, those are probably the ones where you should have this more in mind. So maybe if you can comment on that, would be great.
Yeah, of course. It's a really good question. So yeah, what I think is helpful is to think about the people. So yeah, I'm a human rights person by background. I'm interested in humans. Is to think about the people who are involved in research. And yeah, if you are like me, I do a lot of social studies and humanities work. That's often the people that I directly interview with or the communities that I'm working with. But there are, even if you're doing something slightly more abstract or computational, there may still be people involved. So for example, if you are a genomics researcher, you're working with data about people. So you may want to think about how to bring them in. And yeah, I think, I actually did my first degree in mathematics. And yeah, a lot of that is very abstracted from the human world. But you're probably still, even if you're doing very, very abstract, pure mathematics, you're probably still working with people, even if it's all the mathematicians, who are people too. And so it may be that this framework is more useful to think about, well, who's in your research group? To what extent are you taking their ideas into account? How much power do they have in terms of putting forward their ideas? It's definitely a framework that's going to apply very differently to different fields, but I think it still has applicability. And we're all here because we think that the work that we're doing should be open, which means bringing other people in. Even if they're mathematicians.
Yeah, can I just ask just a quick follow-up? So let's say the example of abstract math research. The participatory research approach could be, rather than having it with the outside of academia, you could apply it within academia, within a department, or within. Is that what the example you had in mind? Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much.
And Yo's made a really good point that the SETI at Home project was a citizen science public participation project where we weren't bringing in people who knew about computation. It was using people's spare capacity on their computers to do cool stuff. So but those people were still important to the project.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for your answer.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Laura. And I am gonna move to our last speaker today, Leslie Chan. And officially, Lisa is going to be chairing this. So Lisa will take the question. But Leslie, again, I am so excited about our lineup today. As Graciela was saying, I've been a fan of all these people's works. I'm very excited to hear. Leslie, over to you.
Are you able to see my slide?
Yeah, looks beautiful.
Okay, great. Sorry, I didn't download the template for the Open Seat initiative. Well, thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I was quite excited when I heard about this Open Seat initiative and this format of having this cohort progressing through the weeks and learning about the different dimensions of open science and practices. So I'm not going to need to go through, definition about open science and so forth. So I'm going to share some of my thoughts about open science and the notion of bibliodiversity, and where that notion means, what that notion of bibliodiversity means to me, and where it can help us in terms of thinking about imaginations about what are possible with regard to open science and different practices. A little bit about myself. I teach in the Department of Global Development Studies at the University of Toronto. And you can see the link. And a few years ago, my students and I started what we call the Knowledge Equity Lab to bring together a number of our research projects together. And it is also a way to bring in community members of different kinds, both overseas and locally, to take part in our research activities, because we also believe, as Laura does with regard to participation with community members on research questions that actually have the greatest impacts on them. And so we've been trying to learn more about different forms of participatory research and pedagogical practices as well. And so if you visit the lab, you'll find links to different activities and projects that we've been involved with, some of which I'll refer to quickly. I also want to shout out to the drawings, the paintings I'm sharing here by an artist by the name of Angie Vanacita, and she's based in, I believe, in Ecuador, and she works in various parts of Latin America, depicting community resilience despite all kinds of extractive industry and destructions around their habitats. So you can see in the background, there's a couple of trucks taking away minerals from the land, and she depict a lot of these kind of destruction, but at the same time, reminding us that communities are powerful when we work together and share the common values, that you can overcome a lot of things. So I think this is a theme about bibliodiversity as well. So that I think in the context also of open seeds, I think is good to think about the similarity between knowledge diversity and biodiversity. And as our world is increasingly being monopolized by corporations and destructions through extraction, we see the similar and parallel things happening in knowledge production. That is, we're seeing monopolizations of knowledge productions around the world and being confined to a very narrow set of ideas of what constitute legitimate knowledge. So bibliodiversity is really about expanding that imagination. As I said, I think many of you now, 12 weeks, you've been talking a lot about open science. I'm not going to talk too much about open science in particular, but I want to talk about how bibliodiversity and open science are particularly well linked together. And then I would like to conclude by suggesting that we need to move from the current monoculture of the mind, a term that is often used by Vandana Shiva, some of you might know her, to refer to the kind of mindset that is dominating the world of food production. Again, this is quite relevant to when we talk about seed diversity and open seed, because in the globalized world of food production, we are seeing the kind of extreme monoculture of food production and the destruction of indigenous way of food agencies and food sovereignty. So Shiva has been calling for, of course, return to the kind of diversity of food and seed. And of course, food is knowledge and seed is knowledge. So again, the parallel is quite clear that we need to rethink the current monopolization of ways of knowing and being to a more pluralistic ecology of knowledges. And we'll share some of those examples. As I said, many of you have been looking at open science. You'll be familiar with UNESCO's recommendation of open science. We're particularly pleased that, in terms of addition to more traditional definition of open science, inclusion of engagement of societal actors, and then, of course, dialogue with other knowledge systems. And these, these are really inherent connection with the notion of bibliodiversity. And so we're very pleased to see these more current recommendations that go beyond the more technical requirements about data sharing and open access publishings and so forth. This is a very different conceptions of open science. My interest came from really the world of knowledge, academic knowledge production. And if I not fast forward, but go back in time when I was doing my PhD, and that was the time when I realized, when I tried to access different literature, that of course the world of scientific publication was dominated by the global north, and I was very curious as to why that's the case where I came from I grew up in Hong Kong and China. There's, Southeast Asia is of course, long history of knowledge and science, but, and then, of course, many part of the world as well has been producing knowledge and science for a long, long time. And yet, when I came to university, our library only access a certain type of knowledge through our library system. And I began to learn about how our system of knowledge production has really been dominated by a small number of multinational commercial publishers. And on top of that, these publishers also created metrics that are very stringent in terms of what constitute legitimate academic scientific knowledge and what are excluded from being considered to be acceptable academic knowledge. And so this map depicts the world according to the number of publications and the number of citation relative to the number of researchers in the particular countries. And the distortion is quite clear. And you see in the global north, the US, Europe have disproportionately represented relative to the majority of the world, literally were rendered invisible through this type of metrics, particularly citation and publication counts, the quantitative metrics. And so I became very interested in how this world became normalized and also became a form of governance instrument that actually affects researchers from around the world, because there are hardly a day that go by I don't hear from colleagues from different part of the world who said, "Oh, I must publish in these journals, or my promotion they wouldn't be counted in my promotion or my grant application." So there are certain notions of where a researcher ought to be publishing and what type of metrics are counted becomes something that is governing a lot of researchers' behavior and their own future. I have an arrow there pointing to a region of Africa. This is roughly where Uganda would be. A colleague of mine 22 years ago, Professor James Duaney, started a journal called African Health Sciences. And part of the frustration he had at the time when he was doing his own medical research, and he tells a story here in one of the podcasts he did with us, was that he did this research study locally, and he rolled it up while he was in Zimbabwe, and he submitted a paper to a journal that is based in the UK, a medical journal is based in the UK, and the paper was rejected. And a few months later, he was working for Oxfam and happened to be staying at a location on a street called Edinburgh Drive. He decided to take the same paper, put in an envelope, put the new address on it, and send the same paper to the same journal. And this time the paper was accepted. And to his great frustration, his conclusion was that this is not even about the content of the paper, it's about where the paper is coming from. And so these kind of judgment, as extreme as it might sound, is actually commonplace within the academic production system. So who is the gatekeeper and who get to make these kind of decisions affects many, many researchers from the majority world that are not part of the decision making. So he started his own journal with his colleagues and graduate student called African Health Sciences. Now in his 23rd year, they're able to publish a lot of important work that are done locally by researchers locally, but also by researchers from across Africa. And this is a reminder about the importance of what we call bibliodiversity, that is the places where knowledge are being produced and published ought to be as diverse as the people who are interested in doing the research themselves. But in the current system, there is only a very narrow set of centers of production that kind of certify the rest of the world, even though they shouldn't be vested with that kind of power. Right? And so we need to see more of these type of initiative from around the world. The question is, how do we make sure these different initiatives are recognized, supported, and made actually known to everybody around the world? Now, as I said, the contrary has been happening, and many of you who keep track of these kind of statistics, not surprised by the fact that in 2002, there were something like 3.3 million scientific articles published, mostly in the science technology field, 3.3 million in 2022. But in 2016, there was only 1.92 million. And then if you go 10 years earlier, it's even fewer. But the point here is that we've been seeing very, very rapid growth of publication. I think I want to emphasize publication, not necessarily advancement in knowledge. But so what we've seen is these overproduction of publications, because the metrics demand that the more the better, the more citation the better, and so researchers are made to publish more and compete more, and of course publishers are taking advantage of this need and providing pay to publish services that even drives up even more overproduction instead of real knowledge sharing and so forth. So what we're seeing is this overproduction and corporate consolidation. And at the same time, they're using technology, platform, algorithms, search engines to further enhance their visibility and further marginalize those outside of that system. And this is where a lot of smaller publishers have also been calling for bibliodiversity. That is, their way of publishing local voices are being drowned out by these powerful multinational cooperation and mechanisms, and the kind of university demand for these big name and big brand that are killing essentially important knowledge system. Some of the research we've been doing in our lab is really mapping these global power structure. So we've been looking at how these corporations, they are not actually acting alone, they're acting in conjunction with a lot of multilateral organizations like the OECD and the World Economic Forums and the Gates Foundations of the world, and all these places, they all vilify the same set of metrics that then are being taken advantage of by the publishers, that then reinforce a particular set of view about what constitute valuable knowledge. These then are then included into rankings of universities, and then everybody think that those rankings becomes a real and objective way of telling which is the best university and so forth. But when you dig down in it, there are these system of ownerships of privatized metrics that then act as these standards for people to have to be obeying. So our research is really looking into how these things are constructed, how flimsy they are, and yet how unquestioned they are at times, and most of the time. So our work is to map these systems out. This is a particular example of a mapping of Elsevier, how they created these end-to-end knowledge production system from the time you submit your articles to the time is being peer reviewed, from the time is being indexed, and then of course now increasingly being used in predictive metrics that they then sell to university for employment purposes. And so these technology are all designed in their own favor to kind of lock you into these digital wall system, and it's very hard to break out of them. And they want to include more and more university in this system, and many African universities are being actually actively captured by saying, oh, you have to, you publish with us, you get the metrics, you get the ranking, and so on and so forth. And so what we have is really what Vandana Shiva been saying about a monoculture of the mind. Now, Shiva was talking about the monoculture of the mind with reference to the monoculture of crops. But as I said earlier, there's a clear parallel and linkages to the monoculture of the mind with regard to knowledge. And there is also parallel with regard to what you're referring to as the centralization and monopolizing power and control, right? And so what we're seeing is that of the erosion of diversity. But she reminds us that diversity is not simply there for its own sake, but it is very much about our future, about survival, about sustainability, about well-being for everybody. So the erosion of bibliodiversity, knowledge diversity, is the erosion of human imaginations and well-being, much like the erosion of food diversity is also an erosion of human ecological well-being. And so to then sum up, bibliodiversity is really about different knowledge expressions and form. You know, we still get too hung up about articles and books. We know there are fantastic storytellers from around the world who share knowledge in different ways, through theaters, through arts, through different expressions. How can we incorporate these different forms of expressions? How can we go beyond the single world ontologies of hierarchy and of knowledge and positivism, reductionism, and universalism that is central to Western science for so long? How can we incorporate the multiplicities of ways of knowings from different cultures, traditions, indigenous knowledge systems from around the world to enrich what we currently know as science? And of course, there are many different knowledge makers and caretakers of our knowledge system that we don't generally acknowledge. If you think about seed as knowledge, then farmers are really some of the most important knowledge keepers for us in terms of sustainability and future survival. We don't tend to think of them as important knowledge makers, but they are. And so at the same time, for those of us working in academia, we have to think more about how do we rethink research impact, different way of thinking about values of our research. How do we think about various publishings, means of sharing beyond these dominating models? How can we think about community-governed open infrastructures that support the different diversity of scholarly communications? And of course, Latin America has been the leader in all these areas. Latin America has long tradition of open science, open access through different regional consortiums and so forth. And so we already have lots of examples to learn from. So to conclude, I also want to refer back to some of these work by Toro Escobar. Some of you may be familiar with, an anthropologist originally from Colombia, who's been reminding us about the importance of thinking about a pluriversal view of the world. Pluriversal really view is really a challenge to the kind of one world ontologies of universalisms and reductionisms in Western science, as I referred to earlier. How do we think about different way of knowing the world, but different way of creating world within many worlds, with many different worlds, instead of the singular worlds that we live in terms of the academic production system? His reminder is that knowledge is, and many other people have said the same thing, knowledge is always relational and situated, that there is no such thing as just simply detached, disembodied objective knowledge. And that most importantly, everything are radically interconnected, are interdependent, that we're not just dependent on other human, but we're also dependent on other non-human world. And again, in most indigenous cosmologies, there are separations into human and non-humans are simply not like that in the West. And so when we embrace these different ontologies, we're actually allowing different way to think about science and engagement, and how we share those what we learn with each other. And so as again Shiva related to us, we need to think about diversity as really sustainability and well-being for all. So I'm going to stop here, and I hope that makes some sense.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I Lisa told me that he's having internet difficulty, so you would unfortunately hear from me sharing that. So I am very much influenced by Leslie and his team's work, and there are books that I continue to tell people about. So I'm always pleased to hear more people learn about your work, Leslie. There are a few questions, and I'm going to combine two questions. Kim asked about can you define bibliodiversity again? Does it mean many options for publishing? I tried to clarify a little bit, but I would let you do more justice to that, where we talk about different forms of knowledge production and sharing. And in the same vein, Faisal, we have one more question from Faisal around what strategies can publishers adopt to prioritize bibliodiversity under financial pressure that favor commercially viable worker over diverse or experimental content?
Right. So there's a narrow definition of bibliodiversity, and if you take a term quite literally, it would mean really the diversity of publishing outlet and format, right? So that was one of the common definition, and in fact, the terms that was made better known by a group of publishers originally from Latin America who call for bibliodiversity from the South because they were under great pressure from these global North publishers that been eroding their presence, right? So from a publisher standpoint, bibliodiversity is really about diversity of publishing outlets and formats and languages to support local knowledge. But I try to expand the bibliodiversity to also include diverse form of knowledge and cosmology and ontologies as a way to know the world in the first place before you can share them through publication. And so I try to expand bibliodiversity beyond the mechanics of it in terms of publications. I hope that answered that question. And then sorry, I forgot about the second question.
Yeah, the second question is what strategies can publishers adopt to prioritize bibliodiversity? I think also talking about capitalistic behavior we have where professional workers are prioritized over experimental, or just for instance.
Yeah. So there are lots of actually very interesting open access publishing experiments going on by book publishers. So if you go to a website called Radical Open Access Collective, you'll see a lot of very interesting independent book publishers, community-based, sometimes driven by academics that published, with their own labors and some funding support. Some of you may have heard of a initiative called Open Library of Humanities, for example. They have been publishing open access journals and books through these collective funding models where they ask library to put money up front to support a particular titles, and when they have enough library that support it, then they could go ahead with the production. So libraries are paying for subscription anyway. So instead of paying for a subscription, their money become investment in developing a journal or a book series, right? So these models, collective payment models, are actually quite common. And there's many open access publishers. In Africa, one that I like a lot, if you Google it, it's called African Minds. They also use a variety of funding models to publish African-based scholarships. And so these things do exist. And what can we do to support these? smaller publishers. I think more, I mean, I've been telling some of my colleagues, my senior colleagues who are not aware of them, to publish with them, because there's still a tendency to think about the big, names. Oh, I'm going to go to Cambridge. I'm going to go to Sage. I'm going to go to, and yet they waste a lot of their time going with these big publishers. 3 or 4 years later, they get a book publisher where they can work with these really progressive small publishers that work with you on your project, get your work out quickly, and the readerships, right? And so don't get hung up on the name. And that's part of what we need to do, so that people who do evaluation gonna really think about what impact these work have, rather than what brand name is being attached to the publication itself. So that's the other part that I mentioned, right? That we have to change our mindset about where these things, where materials are coming from, and what names do we care or not care about, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thanks again for coming to this call. And Laura has dropped, but Stephane, to you as well. And if you would like, I would free you up for the remaining 10 minutes. Thanks so much, all the speakers. This brings us to the last part, which is you talking to each other. I feel like we have really broad range of things to hear about today. So the breakout discussion you're going to have is, what does open science mean to you, based on what we have learned around participation, knowledge diversity, and we've also received this freedom to think about different kind of learning about the world. So the questions you would be thinking about, what kind of practices that you are doing is advocating for openness in your work in different forms. So we heard about different types of openness that would even go beyond what we heard today, but also thinking about the other 6 kind of open science practices we had. So I have already created breakout rooms, and I would open it up. If someone cannot find people in their room, you should be able to move around as well. With that, I'm going to send you on for 8 minutes and bring you back before we end the call. Thank you all. Yes,
Thanks.
Vincent.
I have to run, but I want to say thanks for having me here. And anybody wants to follow up with me, by all means do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks so much. Quickly, just to say thank you all. I'm so delighted that we've made it together so far, and we are all enjoying this journey together. There is no specific assignment after this call, but I would like to remind you that if you haven't done Mountain of Engagement after talk by Laura and Stephane and Leslie, I hope you can go back to that document and think about participation. You can think about how you're engaging with people, think about who you're engaging with, even if you don't think your project is participatory to the degree a citizen science project might be. So Mountain of Engagement, I'm going to always advocate for that as a very good tool. So please go back and improve that if you would like to. There is no additional things coming up, except for we have one last cohort call, which would be on community management, which would be about ally skill. How do we step up and use our privilege for people in our community, which will be continuation of this conversation. So I'm very delighted to end this call. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Good to see you, everyone, and we'll see you on Slack. Keep asking questions. If there are things that you need, email us or reach out to Taj, myself, Sharan, or Yo. Yo is back if you haven't noticed. All right, y'all. Take care.
Bye, everyone.